Well, good morning, everyone. And on behalf of the Edinburgh Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to welcome you all to this morning's event. I'm Jo Davidson. I'm Director of Policy here at the Edinburgh Chamber, and it's my very great pleasure to introduce today's Sustainable Economic Recovery panel session, focusing on innovation, the latest in our series of Sustainable Economic Recovery panel events. As we're all very aware, innovation is a key driver of long-term economic growth. And as we hopefully and tentatively begin the economic recovery from the impact of COVID-19, innovation will be key to addressing some of the immediate and longer-term impacts of the current crisis. Innovation can also address several structural challenges that face the economy, including improving long-standing poor productivity, addressing large-scale disparities across and within regions. Many of those, as you'll all be aware, have been exacerbated by the current crisis. We see this even in our own region, where around 23% of our children still live in relative poverty, which is among the highest rates in Scotland. And reorientating the economy to reach net zero emissions of greenhouse gases by, in Edinburgh's case, the city's target of 2030. Investment and innovation in these areas can also help our economy pivot towards a sustainable growth pathway and improve equality of opportunity. Yet we tend to underinvest in innovation relative to some other countries, particularly when faced with economic downturns, such as that which has been created by COVID. So how can innovation help support our immediate and longer term recovery and growth? What role can and should it play, and what is needed at a local and national level to create the environment where innovation can flourish? These and many other questions are those we hope to explore in our session today. We are very, very fortunate this morning to have Jarmo Eskelinen guide us through this topic. Most of you will know Jarmo, but by way of a brief introduction, he is the Executive Director of the Data-Driven Innovation Programme at the University of Edinburgh, which is part of the 1.3 billion Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region deal, which in part aims to transform the city region into the data capital of Europe. Jarmo joined the Data-Driven Innovation Programme in September 2018, and he leads its very critical work. Over the course of this 10-year programme, the University of Edinburgh, alongside Heriot-Watt University, will collaborate with industrial partners on database projects in the public, private and third sectors, and will and already has, in some areas, amongst other things, launch spin-out companies, attract startups and grow established businesses, driving public and private sector investment and creating 5 data-driven innovation hubs, including the Bayes Centre and the Edinburgh Futures Institute, among others. Alongside his work leading this important initiative, Jarmo is a member of the Smart London Board, which is charged with helping the Mayor shape his vision and strategy for London's Smart City agenda. He's a board member of Open Knowledge International, which is a global non-profit organisation focused on realising open data's value to society by using it to take action on social problems. And he was previously Chief Innovation and Technology Officer at Future Cities Catapult, which aims to advance urban innovation, grow UK companies and make cities better by convening the key stakeholders of a city ecosystem, including businesses, universities, city leaders and citizens, to solve urban challenges. So I'm sure you'll all agree that we couldn't be in better hands as we look at the issue of innovation and its role in our recovery this morning. Before I hand over to Jarmo to introduce our very esteemed panel, just a couple of points of housekeeping from us. I'm sure we're all very familiar with the etiquette by now, but if you could please stay on mute while the panellists are speaking. And also just a reminder that the session is being recorded. So with that, I'll hand you over now to Jarmo.
Very good. Thank you, Joanne, for the kind introduction. Yes, great to be here. This is the part of the series at the Chamber of Commerce of Sustainable Recovery Panels. And as an activity, a very, very timely and important thing to do for the Chamber, both for Edinburgh itself, as the city which has been in several sectors hit hard by the pandemic, tourism and festivals, to say the least, or cultural sector, but also because Edinburgh is the engine of Scotland to a large extent, especially when it comes for innovation and entrepreneurship. This is the entrepreneurial capital of Scotland, and we have a national role to play to ensure that the nation recovers from the turmoil created by the recent events, and can also capitalize on the possibly also new opportunities provided by change, because every change has different phases, many negative, but also some positive, even in an event like the pandemic. Regarding the DDI program, thank you for the introduction. That covered the basics well. Just to give you a snapshot of where we are, I'm glad to say that the DDI has been delivering through the previous year. The teams of the university have pivoted well to the online working, and we have been able to launch several key anchor initiatives, especially the things like Global Open Finance Center of Excellence, which is the new global center for innovation in open finance, close to 50 million of a budget, and very important for the recovery topic, NHS Data Log, the operation which integrates health data across the East Lothian region, and which has pivoted to integrating COVID data during the previous year, has been helping with the diagnostics, understanding phenomena like long COVID and the combination of different diseases and COVID for patients, and in a concrete way helping to save lives through data, helping the clinicians and the doctors to understand what COVID actually is. DDI is at a turning point now when we are almost 3 years in the program, because we have finalized all the government Green Book business cases, so all the investment projects are on track. We have also been able to construct through the pandemic year, so that the latest estimates have been that about 1,100 workplaces have been secured or created by the construction and innovation activities already. So we are on track to deliver our so-called trade KPIs, talent, research, adoption, data, and entrepreneurship in 10 years' time. But that all needs to be done in collaboration with partners. DDI is an enabler, and the whole point of DDI is a collaboration between the companies, the innovators of the city, and we are there to build bridges between these stakeholders, and that's what this panel is all about as well. So we have a fantastic group of people from a range of organizations. I'll let the speakers to introduce themselves, but just in a nutshell, joining us first will be Edinburgh Futures Institute, one of the DDI innovation hubs, one of the 5, and their Director of Engagement, Owen Kelly. Then the Data Lab, which is one of the Scotland's innovation centers around data. Mark Wilkinson, Head of Business Development from Data Lab, is joining us. Then the voice of the business, Donald Harrell from G1 Group, when he can join us. He hadn't been able to make it just a while back when we checked, but let's hope that he can join at some point. And very importantly then, to close the panel, Claire Womby from Edinburgh Climate Change Institute, because of course when we innovate in 2021, that has to be done in a way which also ensures that there's a planet to live in the future. How do we combine that task with innovation? How do we build new innovation on that task? So we have time until, if I count right, 11, and we'll start by introduction of the panelists, and I'm giving something like 5 to 7 minutes for each panelist. Some of the people have slides, many don't, and I keep an eye on the clock, so please don't flow to far longer than the allocated time, because panels are all about discussion, and we have a great group of people joining us who have been part of these discussions. We want to hear from them. For everybody, as a housekeeping rule, for everybody who's not the presenter, please keep your cameras and mics off for now, in order to not disrupt the introductions. when you have questions, you can post them on the chat, or you can put your hand up. You know, we all used to this now. It's been a crash course of remote working, so I'm pretty sure that this will all go fabulously. And on that note, I will then start and give the floor first to my colleague Owen from Edinburgh Futures Institute, one of the DDA hubs, which is currently a massive construction site at the place of the old new Royal Infirmary. Owen, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Jarmo. Thank you very much, and thanks to the Chamber for having us today. And it's nice to see some familiar. Well, when we get to see faces, I'm looking forward to seeing some familiar faces. So, yeah, my name's Owen Kelly. I'm actually Deputy Director of the Edinburgh Futures Institute, and in this very short introduction, which isn't going to involve any slides, I'm just going to really try and summarise EFI's approach and how it slots into the DDI program and other activities at the university. And Jarmo's already covered that, so I won't start rehearsing any of the background to the DDI program, which I'm sure most people are familiar with anyway. So, as Jarmo says, Edinburgh Futures Institute is, you know, a big landmark in lots of ways. It's a big physical landmark. It's the old Royal Infirmary building at the top of the Meadows, which many people in Edinburgh will know of. And it's a big landmark for the university and for the city deal as well. So what's it all about in summary? Jarmo's already mentioned one or two of the sort of big ticket activities like the Centre for Open Finance, but it's really guided by a number of principles, which I think are very relevant to the conversation that we're going to be moving on to. So I'm not going to talk right now about the detail of what's going on in EFI. I think we'll come on to that as we go through the conversation. But you know, the point of the whole enterprise is that it's an acknowledgement that the big questions facing all of us really don't come packaged up in neat disciplinary packages, which is how universities do tend to see the world for all sorts of good historical and academic reasons. But one of the sort of fundamental principles of EFI is that the questions that are addressed in there come in from outside. Then they're not sort of created in the minds of academic colleagues or in the minds of students. They come from outside, from what some people might call the real world, although I'm sure we could debate what's real and what isn't, but that's the idea. The questions come in and then they're brought into the ambit of EFI. And what happens there, again, a fundamental sort of precept for the Institute is that it's all operating on the basis that there are new insights and new ideas and innovations that can come from collisions of ways of thinking. Now, anyone who's at all, and many people are familiar with how universities operate, this goes by names like multidisciplinarity and stuff like that. These are really academic terms of art for, I think, mainly academics to use. But the more important idea is that the new ways of thinking come from these unexpected collisions, and that's a deliberate construction of the new institute. It's very heavily so it's physically going to open in 2023. There's been a little bit of a delay introduced in the building project, which is huge, historic building. You can imagine the complexity of that. That's been delayed a little by COVID, but it's still going. You know, it's on time, on track, once the building is open, the idea behind it is that it will be open literally to everyone. There will be a constant coming and going of people, all kinds of people from business, people from third sector, coming and going and exchanging ideas and working together on the big ticket questions that are identified through this process of challenge-led thinking. It will, in the early years, certainly, first 10, 15 years, it is a major hub for the delivery of the DDI program. It is very heavily focused on the questions that come from data and the innovations that come from data. Some of the main areas of activity at the moment are around creative informatics, how all of that relates to the creative industries, which I'm sure we'll come back to in the context of Edinburgh and its future. And also the big questions, which again, I think we'll come back to in the conversation around the ethics of data. The Centre for Techno-Moral Futures is formally opening later this week. It's already very active. And that is funded by Baillie Gifford through a very generous gift. And that is to look at the ethical questions that surround data. And I think, and we'll come into this in the questions, I'm sure, I think that's probably an area where whatever kind of innovation and whatever kind of future we're talking about in relation to data, that's got to be a very, very large area of consideration. But anyway, really looking forward to the conversation, and that's a quick summary of what EFI is all about. Thank you.
Fantastic, Owen. Thank you. Big topics there. Role of ethics in innovation in general, and of course data innovation particularly is a biggie for sure. Also touches, I think, the domain of the data lab, where our next speaker is from. So, Mark Wilkins, role of data in innovation. What are you guys up to at the moment? You've been quite busy, I've heard, during the past year as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jarmo. So, morning, everybody. Yes, we have been very busy. I'm a new recruit to the data lab. I joined during lockdown last year, so I'm very excited about the opportunity of working with these guys. Jarmo, I'm sure you're going to keep me to time because there's a lot going on. So I tend to get carried away and a bit passionate about it. So please keep me right on time. But if I give you a quick overview of where the data lab sits and the sort of activities we get involved with, hopefully that will give you a feel for where we fit into the kind of landscape. So our core mission effectively is to deliver economic and societal benefit to Scotland. And we do this through leveraging the world-class academic experience we have in Scotland, through upskilling and reskilling of talent in data science, artificial intelligence and machine learning areas, and where available provides collaborative funding allocations to act as catalysts for that data-driven innovation. And we split the areas we work in into kind of 3 broad categories. So that support of innovation, skills and talent, and then community building. And those 3 we see as the key areas to help drive things forwards. So if we look at how we support innovation, we work across just about all industries in Scotland, identifying innovation projects where applied research, either from universities or from our own data team, can help an organisation drive economic or social benefit and create new high-value jobs. So under that category, we have carried out over 140 collaborative innovation projects, including direct funding to universities of about 4 million, to help them work directly with industry and public sector. And supporting a project portfolio value there of around about 12 million. And we have specifically this year, it's an interesting fund, a Moonshot fund. So this is funding that's primarily targeted at helping transformational sector level change. It won't come as much of a surprise to anyone that we're aligning that with the COP26 and green recovery themes this year. We're going to look at the themes that come out of COP later this year. Fingers crossed, everything goes ahead for COP in November. We're going to drive challenge calls off the back of that to try and create some real tangible legacy change off the back of the activity with COP this year. We also support sectors such as financial services, healthcare, energy and digital, lots of areas. The companies we are supporting or have supported, predicting an increase in their revenue of over £200 million and the creation of over 750 new jobs. And we also not only help provide our own funding into that innovation cycle, but we help organisations capture and funding from external funding. So for example, from Innovation UK, etc. So we have a team that helps optimise applications for that funding. And also we join the consortium making that bid if we believe that can add value with our own data science team. In addition to that, we also launched a new service last year called Torch, and that's specifically designed at SME mainstream organisations, looking at how we can help them change a data idea into real world activity that is benefiting a business and creating business value. So that launched last year, just as lockdown kicked off. So the business model for that was an interesting one that had to be quite agile and move. It was interesting, the engagement we got last year, a lot of startups. This year, we're starting to see more established businesses engage with us. So that's how we support innovation. On the skills and talent side, this is a big area for us and has expanded a lot over the last 3 years. We cover a wide range there. We have 160 MSc students that we sponsor this year. And what we do is not just sponsor them, but we engage them with industry. So we get them project placements in industry, 2-3 month projects. We connect them to industry through our data talent component of, some of you may have heard of DataFest. It's a conference we do every year. We've got our first key event actually coming up in May. It's going to be spread over 9 months this year, which is slightly different than normal. But that's a great way to connect the students and industry and make sure that we're generating that benefit for Scotland as a whole. We also do continuous professional development training. This is a key area actually we're seeing, helping leaders of businesses understand how they can take data in their business, create strategies, implement data teams, and drive real value within their businesses. So again, that's a key focus for us just now. We also work with Skills Development Scotland and other agencies to develop and approve data analyst modern apprenticeships, science graduate level apprenticeships as well. And then the last category, that community building, that's a really key one for us. We have, the only thing I'm really going to say, just to finish off quickly on this, is that we have a really powerful community in Scotland. That's one of our key assets as a nation. And I see that, you know, I've only been with the Data Lab a few months, but I see that repeatedly with international organisations coming to us, looking to see how they can get involved in the community here in Scotland. And these are not necessarily international organisations who are looking for a base in the UK and looking at Scotland as an option. A lot of these organisations already have a base either in London or North England or Northern Ireland, but they still see what's happening in Scotland as something that's really exciting they want to get involved with. So I think one of the challenges maybe for us as an organisation is to make sure our domestically based organisations have awareness of what we're doing and awareness of that support structure and the landscape of support that we are a small part of, that they can hook into and make use of. I think I'll leave it there, Yarman. That's probably, I could go on for a little bit longer, but I better not.
Excellent. I'll poke you with some more questions about the topics. Very good. So it seems that we are missing one panelist. So Donald Harrell has been caught up with some urgent business priorities, and so we are missing him from the G1 group. But I trust that our excellent panel and very distinguished group of people on the joining us today will more than fill the gap. So we'll move then at this stage to the Edinburgh Climate Change Institute. So Claire Wamby, your introduction, please.
I think I've got some slides. I will see if this works. Can you see that okay? Yeah.
Let's give it a second. Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I am the Carbon Innovation Manager at the Edinburgh Climate Change Institute. We used to be the Edinburgh Centre for Climate Change. No, we used to be something else, but we've changed recently. And it's quite difficult to remember what the name is now, which is why I needed slides. We're based at the University of Edinburgh, actually in the Geosciences School, but we are kind of almost like an independent institute within the school, dealing very specifically with climate change as a problem. It's not just the innovation team that live in ECCI. We also have kind of various other organisational partners that we share the building and the space with, and it kind of emphasises collaboration. So we also have the Climate Exchange, who provide independent advice and research and analysis to support government policy. We've got the Sustainable Scotland Network, who are the public sector network kind of nexus really in Scotland for climate change. So they're supporting around 600 members on a net zero journey. We have Sniffer, who are an environmental charity that focus on resilience and in particular in terms of climate change, the adaptation part of things. And we also have the Scottish Carbon Capture and Storage Research Group, which are a kind of the largest research group around carbon capture in Scotland, and lots of different universities and the British Geological Society. So there's all sorts of kind of things going on in our building. In terms of innovation, I sit in the innovation team, so we deal innovation and skills. We've got kind of two main themes of work at the moment that we're focusing on. The first one is innovation at scale. So this is supporting place-based action. In particular, we are working with cities and local authorities across Scotland, looking at net zero targets, how you develop action plans for those, how you implement those action plans, how quick does quick look like. In particular, we've supported setting up the Edinburgh Climate Commission and the Edinburgh Climate Compact. So the Climate Commission is an independent body helping really sort of provide some support and guidance and advice to Edinburgh as it kind of goes through its net zero journey. The Climate Compact is really interesting because it's a group of organisations, it's businesses and other bodies within the city who have signed up to a specific compact to say that they're going to be dealing with their own emissions, and they're also going to be supporting other organisations and projects towards this. So this is quite a kind of new process that we're going through. My particular stream of work with this is looking at the data side of things. So I've been helping Edinburgh support them to understand the size of the footprint that they're talking about of net zero, which is about 2.5 million tonnes of carbon, to see how the kind of work that they're doing at the moment is going to contribute to reducing that footprint, and also in some cases the projects that are going to increase that footprint. So a couple of people have mentioned buildings that they're going to be moving into. Those buildings will add to the footprint of Edinburgh, and what we need to do is understand how we can kind of reverse that process and get these new buildings to net zero and all of the existing buildings to net zero. So I do a lot of work around the data side of things for big organisations. What does their carbon reduction scenario look like? What is the decision making that needs to go into making better climate change decisions? Alongside our innovation at scale for place-based, we're also interested in supporting businesses. Previously, ECCI had a programme that was funded by the European Union to help startups that were interested in setting up a climate change focused business to get started. And we've helped some really good innovative businesses do this. So two of the ones I've kind of worked really closely with are Solaris Kit, who have a solar thermal collector. They're now manufacturing in Dundee, and Lily Pads, which is reusable sanitary products, who are also manufacturing and selling, and they run an education programme. However, what we're doing now is kind of changing the focus of our business support to look at the businesses that aren't necessarily interested in climate change. So we're trying to kind of like turn what we've been doing with these businesses, which are very engaged, very pro reducing their impact, to see how can we help those businesses that haven't really thought about this problem yet, and how can we support them. And really kind of like helping people to understand that innovation isn't necessarily just about products and services, it's also about people, it's about diversity, it's about the way that you work, the people that you work with. And, you know, in Edinburgh, it's the problem, we know that the problem we're facing is an enormous climate change problem that is actually spread out amongst thousands of problem owners. And so we need a kind of collaborative action from lots and lots of different people who haven't really even seen this yet as a problem that they're going to be having to deal with. So we're trying to work out ways to support all of those businesses in the unglamorous process of understanding what their impacts are, understanding how they can support themselves to change, and also their supply chain to change, and potentially their customers to change. So that's a very brief introduction to what we do. Hopefully I kept to time.
Yes, you indeed did. Very, very good. Fantastic focus area there. Let's kick off the discussion. I'll have a couple of questions for each individual panelist first, and then we'll discuss the some of the wider topics, especially around the sort of innovation ecosystem of Edinburgh and Scotland. And as I mentioned to my fellow panelists at the beginning of the meeting, before we were joined by our participants, was that I'd like to discuss the topic of recent activities which the Scottish government has been starting to develop regarding the startup ecosystem and the support of the tech ecosystem, and how do we ensure then also the need to address the challenges of existing companies which are not, how high growth startups, which are your regular SMEs, companies, big and large, in Scotland? How do we combine these quite different takes on innovation as one of the topics for the day? But all the participants might want to give that a thought as well. How do we balance between sort of startup-driven ways of working, the Silicon Valley playbook, and then the digital transformation needs of your, non by default digital companies? Can we support them with the same measures? But I start first with Owen. Just as a notion, we are all from different organizations, but actually all of the, if we had been joined by Donald, with the exception of Donald, we are still relatively close to the university here. So I lead a university program coordinated by the University of Edinburgh. EFI's University Hub. Claire is working for ECCI, which is again sort of a satellite organization. And also the Data Lab, even though you do have a national remit, you are still hosted by the uni. And that certainly is partially a coincidence, but not only. As a relatively recent person in Scotland, one of the things which I think Scotsmen, we take for granted in Scotland, but it's quite unique, is the fact of the how strong universities Scotland has compared to the size of the nation. It's 5.5 million people, and it has top 50 universities in the world, one in the University of Edinburgh and top 20 in the world. That's a very unique country for you. I mean, it's not something which you see in a nation of 5 million people in Europe, for example, that you have several absolutely highest ranking educational institutions within one country. And of course, in Edinburgh, where we have the University of Edinburgh, Heriot-Watt, Napier, QMU, there's a very strong higher educational sector. So from that viewpoint, Owen, EFI certainly has an aspiration to build them bridges between that higher education sector and the city at large. How do you see that what kind of activities should these be, these sort of public, private, people partnerships, which bring together the innovation power of the unis, which sometimes are seen as being an ivory tower, and the real world needs of the city, the companies and the citizens?
Well, that's a very big question, but I suppose a couple of things that from an EFI perspective. So one of the sort of drivers for EFI's creation was a recognition that particularly following the financial crisis, the boundaries that people had, a lot of people, I used to work in business, I ran a business representing the financial services industry, and I did that around from 2008. Actually, it actually coincided with the beginning of the financial crisis, although that was a coincidence. But I think if we were having this conversation, say 15 years ago, we would say that there was a realm of private business which kind of, ran on its own laws, its own kind of economic laws and other kinds of things, and motivations that we could discuss about profits and so on. But I think there's been what feels to me now, partly also driven by climate change, there's a recognition that these boundaries can't just be treated as absolute. And so I think one of the challenges for Edinburgh is to looking ahead, is to acknowledge that while we can look to private business to innovate, and it's absolutely what we will expect, innovation in a competitive market is not something that happens by some kind of force of nature. All markets are sort of human constructs, and they're social constructs. So in terms of what kind of innovation is going to come from COVID, for example, it's not the only big driver of change, but it is a massive one. And I think is accelerating some trends that were there already. I think a lot of these boundaries are going to start to become, in a hopefully positive way, more blurred, but we're only acknowledging the reality. I mean, I was actually reading yesterday a piece of research saying that the whole idea that, Reagan and Thatcher shrank the state and it was all a kind of neoliberal thing, actually the numbers don't really bear that out. The role of the public realm in relation to business and competitive markets will always be really, really important. So that's the kind of bridging at a kind of conceptual level that EFI is about. But I think in some ways your question is a more challenging one around around the community. I think ivory tower is a kind of, derogatory term that's thrown up at universities, but I think it's a real issue. And I say that as someone who's come into the university relatively recently. As I say, I did other things. I think academia generally is very, very self-referential, but data and the data-driven innovation program does give us an opportunity as people working in universities to find new ways of overcoming that. I completely there's a fantastic book, I don't know if others have read it, by Michael Sandel, which came out this year, called Meritocracy, and he kind of looks at the whole idea of meritocracy. And I think you'll get a lot of people in universities who will talk about merit, and they'll say, oh yes, it's all very meritocratic, as if there's some kind of objective measure of merit that gets you sort of progressing it in life. And he really picks that apart, it's a great book. And I think universities probably suffer quite a lot from that. That's why the ivory tower term is actually quite, it's sort of on the money in some ways. But as I say, the opportunities that arise through data and data-driven change, they should open up new ways for us to start stepping beyond that and actually working with the city and with the people in ways that we perhaps haven't done in the past.
Excellent, thank you. On a more sort of a concrete and timely horizon, then, have you seen during the past year good examples of the ways with which different sectors, companies have been tackling the challenges created by the pandemic?
So the one I would probably point to from the point of view of EFI, because we're sort of involved in it, is the work that's been going on under the banner that is called, it's called travel tech, but that's because I think people were looking for a word that could have tech on the end. And it's really looking at a question which I think, coming back to the future of Edinburgh, is going to be a big question for the city for the next several years. And that's this question of tourism and what some people call over-tourism. We can debate what the threshold of that sort of terminology is, but this is a project looking at how data gathering can help us to manage the pressures of tourism, I suppose, as a city. Now, as I say, I know that's a loaded term to talk about over-tourism, but people do, and they invoke things like Airbnb and other sort of drivers of that. But some of the work going on, and EFI is, one of a number of partners in this, on how data, and, some of this is sort of self-evident, sensors, for example, and people flow and that kind of activity. But it would hopefully start to give you a picture of whether this is really an issue, and if it is, what kind of issue is it? And then the city could perhaps be in a better position to consider I personally feel, very tricky question, which has faced lots of cities all around the world, Venice being the most famous example, about how do you actually accommodate tourism in this, putting to one side all the complications that COVID will bring for several years to come, I suspect. But that whole question of the relationship between the thing people are attracted to and how it is affected by the number of visitors. So that's one example, but I think that has big implications for the businesses that are operating in that, potentially big implications for how effectively businesses of all sizes, hotels all the way to, small businesses offering walking tours or whatever, they can all benefit, I think, from that kind of innovation and data-driven thinking.
Yeah. Should we make a bet? Do festivals go ahead?
Well, I see that they are in some form. So probably, we might lose our money at the moment.
I know the preparation is going on, but nobody can actually be completely sure. Certainly, they won't be the same they were 2 years back, but some sort of incarnation will be there. Very good. Thank you. There's a lot of there to come back to, and I'll ensure that happens. Let's move to Mark. Mark, you are also part of the DDI Skills Gateway initiative, which is the another part of the City Region deal, which is funded by the skills part of the City Region deal, and the DDI Skills Gateway covers ranges of learners from school kids to people who are at jobs and need to relearn or learn new talent in order to be be updated to the data-driven times, and you are in that program as a delivery partner for activities which do support companies to adapt new data skills. Have you seen a transformational change in the role or importance of data for companies because of the pandemic, or is it an ongoing trajectory we are witnessing here? Has there been an acceleration of for the need for data skills, for example, or digital skills, if we widen that up a bit?
Yeah, thanks, Jan. I think you're right. I think it's an acceleration. So I think this was it was an issue that was going to happen anyway, but we've definitely seen an acceleration through crisis associated with COVID. And I think, talking about that difference between academic and business, I think there's a job to do for us who are involved in data and analytics. We tend to have our own language. I'm not quite sure we make it as accessible to business as we could do. So I think we need to work a bit better at that and make it easier to make the connection between that approach with data and integrating a data strategy in your business and what that could translate to in business value. And, as we move more to that kind of digital interface with customers, for example, and all of a sudden you're competing in a wider market potentially, how we then take the data from that engagement and optimize it and make the most of it rather than have it sit to the side being underused, I think is a big challenge. So the way we articulate, the way we talk about that connection between business value and data is a big thing. It's something we're looking at as a business or an organization, and how we can take people and businesses who are maybe starting to look at data now and understand that, yeah, there's something that needs to be done there. They need to start looking at that, but they maybe don't know where to start. And we need to make people aware, one, of where they can come to for support, and two, make it an easy transition. So one of my observations coming in is we maybe do things that are kind of siloed activities. So for example, we'll do some training, so we'll do some education. So we talked about skills there. So the skills for both employees and business owners. But what happens after that then? What happens next? There's a break and then they have to find what the next step is themselves, or do we actually get better at hand-holding through the whole process and guiding and signposting for them? So if we're not the answer for the next part, are we making sure they have a direct connection into another organization so that we can take them from that point where the realization, yep, I know I need to do more with data in my organization. It's not just a growth thing, it's a survival subject. So how do I then do it? Okay, well, we'll help you understand that. One, understand where you are, what you're ready for, because the main focus today we're talking about is innovation. Long before innovation, am I using the data that's currently in my business to understand for reporting, for monitoring, for optimizing? A lot of people, like I touched about, as we move into that kind of more digital engagement with our customers, there's more things to look at there in the way of customer engagement, customer experience, understanding where you've maybe got breakpoints that you can better optimize. So all that sort of stuff. So helping them create, take a data idea and bring that to reality. So that includes education. It includes helping them spec out and understand what they need in the way of people, processes, and technology to bring that to life, and maybe introduce them to those suppliers, those providers of that as well. So that piece from, it can't be so disjointed. We have to work better at applying the education we can give them and take them through the next steps. What are the actions coming off the back of that? And then what do you do then? And how do we introduce you to the next people that can help you if we're not the answer? So that's an area we're looking at. So that whole skilling piece has to be both around employees, entrepreneurs, but also if data is going to be utilized in a business, we need to convince business leaders and owners that in actual fact it's not a cost for your business. It can't be considered a cost. It has to be considered as an investment, and it has to be buy-in from the top of the business to make sure you most for that.
How much do you think the people are starting to understand that data isn't just a side product? It actually has to be more central to business. Is that sort of starting to become the prevailing mindset, or is it still the kind of cutting edge businesses which do start to understand it? Or, I mean, first of all, isn't it? Is it that way?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I think if you look at the Data Lab, our experience for the last few years, we've really focused on helping those innovators. And I think what we need to do now is maintain that, but also help people at that starting point. And to your question there, Jarmo, do people recognise that? I think, as part of the COVID recovery programmes, we see the government's putting extra money in at the moment. One of the things we've done recently with government support is start a data leader development programme. So this is taking those organisations, smaller, maybe startups, maybe established SMEs, and bringing them into a cohort where we'll look after them for 12 months. And one day a month, we'll bring them together as a cohort. We'll introduce them to ideas about how they can utilise data better in their businesses. We'll introduce them to people who have gone on that journey before them, have learned the lessons, and want to give back. And I see that as a really strong asset that we've got within our community. We have a lot of people who have successfully gone on that journey and they want to give back to the community and help others. So we're going to help them do that. And to your point there about how do people understand that value of data, what we're keen to do is create these lighthouse use cases in lots of different sectors. So our initial cohort of 15, in actual fact, we're launching this tomorrow. So tomorrow is the first day of our new 12-month program. And we have a cohort of 15 business leaders. And we've deliberately looked to make that a really widespread, diverse group. So we have a couple of social enterprises involved in that. We have another Chamber of Commerce. We have representation from construction. We have representation from aquaculture. We have national representation from all over Scotland. We have retail. We have, we talked about leisure and travel and hospitality being impacted by COVID. We have representation within the cohort of that as well. And I think as we establish those and use them as examples to others, this is what you can achieve. If you actually, you get support, and you take data and you integrate it into your business, you can survive and you can thrive beyond that if you do it correctly.
Very good, excellent. So I think we probably will come back to the skills and innovation topic later in the panel. I think that I see that as a very kind of critical issue for us to discuss today. Back to green topic. So Claire, well, you are Center for climate innovation, so that's your whole business. My experience from many, should I say, traditional domains such as construction, urban design, is that the infrastructure sectors tend to be, should I say, pretty conservative in their approach to adapting new novel things, and certainly from the data-driven innovation point of view, there's lots of room for development there when it comes for innovation. But then on the other hand, there seems to be quite a rapid change of mindsets when it comes from the audience and also from businesses when it comes for example, how green you should be as a business, and what kind of solutions should you support for example for creating and managing your energy needs. Are we sort of reaching a tipping point where becoming green is really becoming mainstream and comes as a pressure for basically any company, no matter how conservative they might be their ways of working? Or I might be too optimistic.
In some ways, yes, there is a sense of a tipping point. I think 15 years ago, it was very, very difficult to get organisations to recognise anything that wasn't past their own remit. So that they basically saw their footprint as being whatever we use in terms of fuels or electricity or transport, and that's our problem. And we, measure it, and we produce our footprint, and we, report on it, and we do something about it. I think that what we've started to see is that this is, particularly for there's some businesses where their chain of impact is incredibly far upstream or downstream from what they actually deal with themselves and operate themselves. That's very true of infrastructure and construction companies, and theirs is often a kind of like an upstream footprint of goods and materials, and it often goes into other countries. It's often temporarily, it could have happened 3 or 4 years in the past, and now they're using those materials, and that carbon is embodied in those, and we can't do anything about it. And then we're building buildings that are going to be using large amounts of electricity and gas and heating fuels, and that they're not very, they're not linked into transport networks. So they're going to have a huge operational impact. And we're starting to see that, and we're seeing that the construction industry in some ways has been, I think has really started to get this. And we've been doing a few projects. There's a project that was funded by the Scottish Research Council, which was looking at the procurement process for buildings, about how do we procure better buildings, both in terms of reducing their embodied impact and reducing their operational impact. And that's really starting to get some traction, with some of the big procurers and some of the big operators in this space. But that's that problem is a microcosm of all of the other problems we have. If you're a hairdresser, your biggest impact is unlikely to be in your salon directly. It's likely to be upstream in your supplies and your materials that you bring in, and downstream in terms of how your clients then manage their hairstyle and their, what they do with it at home. And you've got the impact, you've got the ability to kind of like think about and control some of those and influence some of those impacts. And it's a different way of thinking. So yes, there's a tipping point. I don't know if yet we've really reached the point where consumers are choosing green. As I think there are a group of consumers who will go, yes, I'm making a choice based on, that I want a green product. Sometimes they get a green product, sometimes they don't. It depends. But those are a limited group of people, and they're usually the people who are privileged to have the kind of money and resources to make those choices. So what we need to do is kind of say, right, why does this need to be a choice? Why should you even have a choice of green or otherwise? And why should green be a middle-class privilege? Why can't green be something that everybody gets as a matter of course? Isn't this something, isn't a green product what should be on offer? So I think that we've still got a huge way to go in terms of that side of the market. I don't actually think that consumers yet are driving this. For example, with renewable energy, there's no evidence that people choosing a company that has green energy is actually driving the renewables market at all. The renewables market is very separate from what the consumer is choosing at the other end. So sometimes it's kind of like there's a disconnect there, but my actual feeling is there's more of a groundswell in the business community. And one of the things that they're starting to see is they see risk. It's, this isn't just a problem of climate change. You don't have to want to hug a polar bear. You have to understand that you are exposed to huge amounts of business risk here, both in terms of compliance, but also in terms of the impacts that climate change is going to have on your business. And that's what we're starting to see, is businesses realizing that they are going to potentially lose customers and clients and, in some cases materials, and in some cases, land, if they don't do something to change this.
Yeah. So since I lead the data-driven innovation program, I might ask the challenge of data in this domain. I mean, if we talk about large chains of systemic events, what easily is problematic is the data. How do you manage the data, and how do you kind of prove the causality between different links of the chain? How much is data integration or data accessibility or availability a challenge to understand the impacts of different decisions for businesses when it comes to climate change?
This is a huge challenge at the moment. It's a massive challenge in supply chains. We know I'm doing a lot of work with the Scottish Government around their procurement framework and looking at climate change and procurement frameworks, and even the ability to kind of like ask the right questions of suppliers to get lower carbon products, and then to monitor that actually what you're getting as a lower carbon product is incredibly difficult. But the other thing is that sometimes what we're having to do, and what we've done with the City of Edinburgh, is what we're trying to do is to deal with data when there is no data available. So what happens in a decision-making process, if you're thinking about a new housing development, one of the things we have to start thinking about is, how do we make that a low carbon housing development? How do we have low carbon heating, low carbon power? How do we make sure there's space for active travel? How do we, there's a whole load of decisions. And at the point when we need to start making those decisions, there's no data available. So what we're starting to do at the moment is we're creating systems to enable them to pull bits of scrappy data out of other little bits and and knit them together into something that says, right, okay, this isn't perfect. It's a model of what might happen, but it's better than what you had before. It's a proto data base that we're constructing for you. And as we go through these projects, we're going to start filling in the gaps, and we're going to understand, where our rules of thumb were reasonably accurate and where they were all over the shop. So I think that climate change data is probably, it's lagging behind some of the other stuff, but actually a lot of the data that we're collecting in all sorts of places is actually climate change data. So when people are starting to talk about air quality and climate change are two separate issues, but then they are actually interlinked, and a lot of the data that you use for air quality, you can actually use as a kind of proxy for some climate change things. So we're starting to understand how to get ourselves into that kind of data, that data area a bit better. But I think that the links between, and it's one of the things I've just thought about with this panel, is the links between the Climate Change Institute and other parts and the data-driven innovation part of the university. We need to strengthen those, because we need that expertise in terms to say, look, you've got a whole load of data solutions and we've got a whole load of climate change problems. And I think there's a lot of linking up that we can do here.
Yeah, that's a very valid topic, and I'll give a floor to Owen in a minute to start that bridge building. I absolutely am aligned with this thinking that it's better to, there's not a point of time when you have the right data in the right amount. You have to start with what you have and then build from that, because that will also reveal you what's missing. And that will create an incentive for, make that data available or locate that or open it or harmonize it. And without actually doing it through action, there won't be a time when data is perfect. And that's one of the challenges of the data domain, that people think that their data is not good enough, and therefore they let it sit dormant without using that to understand, how it could be made better. Because without working with data, you actually never reach the point when it's good enough. Owen, that probably is not the point you were going to make, but you host also the Center for Future Infrastructure, and I think there seems to be a perfect opportunity to build a connection between SAR Smith Center and ECCI, for example.
I mean, I was just going to make the point really, and perhaps ask Claire whether she would agree that, where a lot of these, circles overlap is in the world of finance and investment. And of course, there's huge, big, at least in some terms of financial sums of money, discussions about this whole debate about ESG, environmental, social and governance, and how do you audit this kind of stuff? How do you account for it? But it is very much a data issue. So if we're sitting in a very large pension fund, determining how we're going to invest on behalf of the people whose pensions we're managing, some of these are hugely influential, more influential than governments in some cases, and how they shape their investment and what sort of criteria they judge to be the basis for making their decisions. Increasingly, these are coming from climate-related concerns. The other question that relates to that is, in the past, I think many have observed that the big changes in the way those kind of decisions have been taken have been driven by regulation. Companies have not themselves, generally speaking, companies and corporations have not themselves chosen to measure their activity by ways other than profit, for all sorts of obvious reasons to do with shareholders and all sorts of other things. And it's only by regulation that, I don't know, people always use the example of factories were forced to, become safe, because there was regulation that made that happen. I just wondered what you thought was that balance between regulation and the kind of almost generosity of spirit that we might expect of businesses to do this simply because it feels like the right thing to do?
Well, you're probably asking the wrong person here. I think regulation is the answer, because you don't want to rely on people's generosity of spirit. That's something that can change over time. People's, how generous they're feeling can change over time. It's a big ecosystem, and what we need to do is provide some evolutionary pressure, and that's what regulation does. It says, this is the way. Regulation says this is the future that we want. It's not the future that every individual will choose, because they're not very good at managing this risk. But as a society, we are saying this is the future we want. We don't want a future that's 5-degree temperature rise. And so regulation, it has to set a framework to say, if we don't want that future, this is what we have, this is how we have to behave. And then within that framework, the ecosystem innovates. That's what creates innovation, is not freedom. What creates innovation is rules, because that's how people kind of learn, this is what we respond. But what you need is also regulation that's clear and usable, and actually is and good regulation. So one of the problems at the moment is I think there's a huge amount of arbitrage in the system for people to lie through their teeth about their green credentials, because we're not setting up the regulation properly. It's all very piecemeal. We're not saying this is what actually matters. These are the rules. This is a secure framework for you to innovate within. I think one of the things that businesses really, really hate is uncertainty. And so regulation is about providing certainty. And, we have got a choice here, but that choice can't be made by individuals, because it's not how ecosystems work.
A question to that, Claire, maybe wider as well. Do we think that it's possible to combine these approaches to some extent? I would claim it is, but we haven't seen that many examples maybe yet, in which you create circumstances to experiment, try things out, pilot, test, and then that informs regulation. Quite often these are seen as two different tracks, that you create business through experimentation and piloting, and regulation you create through regulation, or through sort of a policy framework process. But is it possible to feed insights which are quicker to reach, for example, from testing and piloting and experimenting, to feed that into the policy framework and make more informed regulation? I would claim that, for example, some of the data regulation we see coming from, let's say, Europe at the moment isn't shows the downsides of not combining insights from experimentation to the regulation development process. Is that am I trying to mix oil and water here, or is it possible to combine the two?
We maybe want to think about having regulation that isn't only written by regulators. That's,
Indeed, yeah.
That's contributed to by people who actually work on the ground. I mean, you need something that's usable and functional. There's no point in having a regulation that no one can meet. There's no point in having a regulation that everyone's met already. There's no point in having, sort of saying we want a data standard where everybody produces a carbon footprint precise of their product, of every single product they do, if that's going to push 90% of the suppliers out of the market. So it's kind of understanding how do you get information and data and innovate and experimentation into the regulation so it's good regulation, and how do you amend the regulation to keep it up to date with what is possible. But these are things that we have done. Or you can just go full Victorian and say we don't want to kill small children in factories any longer. It hasn't worked everywhere, but it's kind of like it worked pretty well here. So I don't know. I mean, I would love the idea that we could suddenly write plastic regulation by by taking the results of experimentation. But the probability is that we will start by writing rubbish regulation and it will get better. But in the same way with data, it's like we start with rubbish data and we improve it over time. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't regulate. I make
a clumsy pivot from one domain of regulation to the other, and Mark, ask you. Data Lab has been in a key role to developing the new Scottish AI strategy. Do you think there's room there, or have you planned activities there which would combine innovation in AI, but feeding that back into the way we regulate AI, both build the marketplace, but probably also to address some of the issues of ethical and fair use of data and AI.
Yeah, so if I understood the question, you're right. We're heavily involved in the AI strategy, and the government have asked us to, we launched that in March, and we have been asked by the government to help them bring that to life. I think that ethical question, I think Owen touched on that earlier as well, is a massive one for everything, because if we're going to have open data and the license to use that open data, then the citizens and the people that data originates from have got to have confidence and trust that we are responsibly treating that data. We are ethically being very responsible and safe with the data, and they need to be confident that the benefit of that data being released and used will be direct back to them. So it's definitely a key. I think it's a key of everything we want to do in innovation. We have to bring everyone with us. We have to convince everyone that it's a good thing. And you know, I don't think we're quite there yet. I'll be honest. I think there's a lot of detractors there who are very concerned about personal data being utilised. But living and breathing data and analytics for the last 20 plus years, I'm really excited about where we could go with this, but we have to bring everyone on board with us. It's no good us sitting in a room coming up with great ideas if we don't have the confidence of the population that we're trying to help.
Very good. Okay, maybe let's shift our focus to a bit nearer term here. There's a couple of comments in the chat there about the ways the pandemic has driven innovation, or the ways to survive. For example, the hospitality sector, which has quickly started to develop different home kits, delivery systems, etc., to be able to operate. Is that something, if we think about the future, is that something which what other measures we could do to support companies to keep that innovation drive going? It's this both in the sense of COVID itself, because frankly speaking, we'll be in the situation of dancing with it for at least the next year or so. So it's not going away anytime soon, despite of vaccinations. And in some areas like the hospitality industry, it will be impacting that domain for a long time, even if it would be, we would solve the issue in Europe, large parts of the world are still in full pandemic. We have the highest numbers of new cases globally as we speak. So how do we keep that innovation going, whether it's because of COVID or other needs which companies face? What other ways we could jointly do to support companies not to feel isolated or alone in this domain?
Shall I have a go first?
Go ahead, Owen.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's maybe a distinction to be made between the kind of innovation that we've seen really because of a sudden disruption of the market. Because of COVID, lots of businesses had to really in some ways very radically change what they were doing, because it was a question of suddenly the parameters of the business had completely changed. No longer could people come, hospitality is mentioned, no longer could people come to your restaurant. So, you innovate and you start, doing deliveries or whatever. And that's a very simplistic example. But so there are these kind of innovations that come about through, I suppose, what you might call discomfort, sort of drivers for competitive businesses in markets. And then there's the kind of innovation that perhaps most of our efforts as people involved in the, to me, fairly busy environment of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial education. And this is really encouraging perhaps what the questioner refers to as an innovative mindset, which is something that's not forced on people because of market pressures and the need to survive, but it's something that's almost chosen as the exercise of certain skills and qualities. And I think this is a kind of constant task for all universities, for all sorts of agencies and organizations, to give every opportunity for that kind of almost intrinsic drive to do new things, to give the opportunity for that to take place. However, I also think that when you do get a big disruption like this, where suddenly the parameters of the market change, business is very quick to react for reasons. Everyone on the call is a business person in different ways. We all sort of know why that is. And I think there is a role, going back to my earlier point about this kind of not separating the world into private competitive business and then, you know, all sorts of public or the public realm in general. There is almost an obligation, I think, on regulators, on those who are responsible for the public infrastructure surrounding this, to be equally responsive to. So when these changes have to happen because of market changes, then quickly other things, the surrounding infrastructure, intellectual and physical and other things, change as well. So yeah, sorry, just a couple of thoughts there, and I suppose just bring it back to EFI. Those different kinds of ways of thinking, that's what EFI is set up to try and make happen in different ways.
Very good, thank you. Others want to give it a go?
I'll, for what it's worth, I thought that was a really good point by Owen there. And you know, can that support structure be agile enough to change when it's required to provide that support for businesses? That's a big question, I think, and one we all need to consider. I kind of split it into two categories. You've got, you know, we're talking a lot about innovation today, and again, that kind of cutting edge innovators and then the guys who are just changing and trying to be agile to survive. And I think if you look at innovators, for us, I think, you know, and the Mark Logan report kind of pointed to this, that there's maybe gaps in that kind of roadmap for startups and entrepreneurs to get funding all the way through to a point where they are driving new jobs and they're established and they're competing internationally. There's maybe we're quite good at helping startups right at the start, but then there's maybe some holes along the way that it's difficult for them to bridge to get forward. So we need to work on that. I think there's an awareness piece as well. If I'm a business or an entrepreneur, and I'm trying to understand where the support is for me, where my funding options are, it's actually really difficult to navigate. You know, it's a very complex patchwork of, you know, there's lots of great activity and support, but it's quite siloed, and sometimes it's difficult to see that combined kind of helicopter view of where to go for what. It's something we recognize as an organization. We're trying to build tools. I think we're trying to scale our impact, and we want to do that without scaling our cost base accordingly. So we're trying to build tools and things that can help people access that sort of thing. So one of the things we're looking at is a fund navigator just now. So looking at pulling together these different sources of funding, depending on where you are on your data journey. So what's available to you, you know, it might depend on location as well, but trying to, so rather than leave businesses to scroll through endless websites for funding calls, try and create things that may mean actually, do you know what, we'll just notify you when we see something that we believe will be of interest to you and relevant to you at this point in your journey. So we'll try and make it easier for you. I think we've got to work harder at how we help SMEs access that, whether that's the innovators at end where we talk about funding, or whether it's more mainstream guys who want to get involved with the community and need some help in understanding where to start and who can help them.
So if we come to the support structures, that's probably a good topic to close with. The Logan report, as was mentioned before, is being actioned, and there's already a pin out for the development of so-called tech scalers, the new kinds of accelerator / incubator organizations, which would be networked across the whole of Scotland. But that supports one domain of companies, which are, you know, your potential unicorns or high growth startups in the future. Then there are all the other companies, which are not such companies, which are, you know, grow organically, which are fundamental in an analog business, not digital business. And which create a large chunk of the workplaces in any nation. Mark, you said that business support is hard to navigate through, but are there other also, any clear domains of support which we would need, which currently isn't there for companies? Which where are the gaps in the support system? Is it just throwing money at companies, or do we have can we provide support in skills? What kind of support is needed to help our local companies to recover?
Yeah, I've touched on it a couple of times. Just creating awareness and ease for navigation is an interesting one. I think if you're talking about skills, the skills gap is being filled, I think, at professional level better. We're driving forward what we do, but there's also good kind of commercial enterprises doing that. I think we're looking to international examples as well, and we're looking to partner up with international academic organizations to drive that skills training and funding. One area that does need some more investment and focus is, from a data science perspective, is probably schools and colleges, and introducing that concept, and which is going to be such an integral part of our landscape going forwards for both business and public sector. We need to introduce that to our future workforce a lot sooner, and invest a bit more in that, and help colleges and schools build those course contents, etc., to expose younger people to. And that's an area we've started to look at, but it does feel like there's a gap there that, if we want people to start having an interest in that area and thinking about careers in that area, we need to capture them younger.
Very good.
Jarmo,
other views? Yeah, Owen.
Yeah, I just wanted to, and it's partly to respond to Elliot Wishlade's point, which I think is a really interesting one in the chat about IP. But picking up, Jarmo, your question was really about, we talk about startups a lot, and actually we talk an awful lot about data startups. But what about businesses which are perhaps more established and aren't in this kind of wholly new sort of category? And one of the projects that's going on, again, EFI is just one part in a bigger thing. Some of our colleagues who are in a spin out from the university, actually, I think Edina. But anyway, what they're looking at is a really interesting idea whereby some of the data analytic tools, which are, of course, going back to the IP point, are all kind of proprietary, and we all know the kind of stuff around how some of the the money that flows through them is handled by particularly big tech companies. But what they're developing is a kind of very, very simple tool, which doesn't require any data understanding, because most business people, or many business people, are not data expert. We can debate whether they should be, but they're not. And this gives them something that is very, very accessible, very easy to use, but which draws on these data tools in support of the data needs of a company. So, for example, it might be a small business that's, I don't know, selling a particular product or a particular service, and the sort of insights that you can get through gathering data, they're being kind of given a tool that allows them to access that without having to overcome, at the very high level, of course, IP type problems, of course. And I realize I'm not really answering Elliot's question, I'm just, it relates to it. But at the same time, they don't have to tackle those very, very tricky, huge, difficult questions. But at the same time, they can still benefit from data. So it's almost like a kind of a sort of beginner's guide, I suppose. That's glib on my part. It's much more than that. But it's a tool that allows all kinds of businesses, including the kind that you're talking about, Jarmo, to participate in the benefits of data. And I thought that was a very interesting project, which I'm glad is part of the DDO program.
Yeah, the Elliot's question in the chat is about how much does the panel think that protectionist treatment of IP, especially foreground IP, is a blocker for collaborative innovation projects? And of course, this is the key question at the heart of the so-called open innovation approach, and quite a few major companies, including likes of Google, have actually embraced, at least partially, open innovation as part of their ways of working, in which they open their IP to partners in order to utilize from insights they might not have been able to develop in-house. But it's still, even though it's been around for a decade at least, I don't think open innovation still is the dominant mindset when it comes to innovation. And it's certainly not so at the universities, to be frank. So that's a domain in which we could do much better than we currently are. And it's a valid point is to also in the second part of the question, which is that our procurement legal specialists serving us well in this respect. Massive question. So we probably can't cover it in the 5 minutes we have left. But again, if I take an example from public procurement side, the quite often the answer for the latter part is that procurement serving us well in this respect. The answer would be no, because the, for example, ownership of different parts of IP isn't defined well enough, and it tends to fall so that the ownership is created on the deliverer side and not necessarily the procurer doesn't necessarily cover or understand that they also have IP to either protect or ensure it's not privatized in the process. But it's a massive topic. Are there any quick takes on that? Do we, for example, know well-working open innovation practices between larger companies and groups of smaller companies closer to home in Scotland, for example?
Only very quickly, Jarmo, I think this is a big topic in a particular context for the new big, well-funded, again, a big success for the team involved, the Global Open Finance Centre of Excellence, which is sort of going to be part of EFI. So this is really about the finance industry, and it's about this whole idea of, if you like, making data more swappable between different entities. So you don't have this proprietary control by, for example, a bank of all the data relating to their customers and all the insights that can come from that. And we can all, I'm sure, see how challenging that is for the business model that some probably have been developing. But this is the idea that these data can be in different ways shared across commercial boundaries and interests. I dread to think what the IP considerations are behind that, but that is an example in a particular sphere, the sphere of I suppose, well, certainly consumer finance and other kinds of finance as well, where these issues are going to be addressed, even though we haven't seen the answers yet.
I think that would be, in general, would be a great, relatively fresh starting point to rethink the innovation ecosystem of something like Scotland, is to see how could we do an open by default in a managed way, which still would meet the ethical requirements and such regarding data usage, to approach the question of sharing from the point of view of open by default, and see where that leads us as the modus operandi for a small place, and try to build a sort of trust-based innovation ecosystem to Scotland. But that will take a few panels for us to get there. We need to start to wrap this up, guys. It's a massive topic, and I think we've been going to quite a few different directions. I probably could have tried to steer this a bit more to focus on the recovery of Edinburgh, but let's do that in the last minute or so. What are the next near-term actions you are going to do to try to support the the recovery close to home? Recovery through of Edinburgh. What's going to happen in the next year by yourselves? 30-second sound bites from each. Who wants to try first?
I'm happy to give it a go first. I think it's interesting what Mark was saying about the difficulties of navigating the landscape for innovation. I think that's not necessarily a massive problem, because I think barriers kind of like filter people, but I think one of the problems is that filter is stopping diversity. I think we have a diversity problem in innovation, and I think we have a diversity problem in Edinburgh, and what we really need is we need more voices and we need different voices, because so far we haven't solved this problem. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is to make sure that the services that we're offering and the skills and the innovation things that we're offering are offered to all people, and that we're trying to kind of get a wider group of people. And so innovators who are not necessarily thinking about products, but who are thinking about ways of working, who are thinking about systems change, who are the groups that we don't have a huge amount of. We don't have very many women doing it. We don't have very many coloured people doing it. We don't have any ethnic diversity. We don't have youth and old age. You know, we need that diversity in order to get innovation to be more effective at Edinburgh. So I think that's something that we're going to be really concentrating on.
Very good. Owen, is EFI going to provide a platform for diversity?
So I would say in the few seconds we have left that in the coming year, the way in, I've mentioned already the kind of operating principles of EFI, and one of them is to not to sit there thinking that we have answers and we can prescribe things, but what we can do is gather in the questions and the challenges from all aspects of the economy and of society. And then we can, I believe, help to address them. So bring us your problems and questions is I suppose, my soundbite message.
Very good. And EFI will be operational, is operational as an organization already, even though the building is still in the
That's right. We're kind of in a prolonged soft launch until the building opens eventually.
23. And Mark, you've been mentioning lots of examples already. Something you haven't covered, which Data Lab is going to do during the next year to support our company?
Yeah, I'm not sure how I pick one. I think the Moonshot Challenge Fund is an interesting one for us this year. And I think to kind of follow on from some of the points made there, we're keen, and I think we mustn't fall into this mistake where we sit in rooms and come up with some great ideas without involving the people we're trying to help and get input from them. So, you know, I think that's a key focus for us going forwards, is whether it's for the Moonshot Fund or whether it's trying to predict what SME businesses need in the way of support to make that next step in data innovation. I think we need to be very conscious of involving the people we're trying to help so that they can help shape what we do.
Very good. And on my behalf, I just mentioned that the DDI program has managed to secure extension to our data-driven entrepreneurship program for 2022. So we are going to provide new opportunities for data-driven entrepreneurship in Scotland and open a new set of AI accelerator call for companies. So stay tuned to apply for that one. Thank you, and we exhausted our time. As said, it's a massive topic. I don't have time here to start to pull all of this together, but I would say that there certainly is it's critical to bring different stakeholders, diverse stakeholders together and support the connection of both the economic recovery and skills development in Scotland to ensure that companies of different kinds, not just the ones led by data-savvy entrepreneurs, will be able to make it through the pandemic. And we have great examples from our panelists about the different endeavors which are aiming to do exactly that. So, Joanne, thank you for the opportunity, and over to you.
Not at all, Jarmo. Thank you so much for that. I wouldn't even begin to try to sum any of that up, not only just because we don't have time, but I think it wouldn't matter if I had another hour and a half. I don't think I could possibly sum up the breadth of issues that we've tackled there on what, as you say, is a hugely complicated but critical issue. So I'm not even going to try. It's far beyond my skills, quite frankly, to do so. Can I just very, very briefly, on behalf of the Chamber, thank all of our excellent panelists today, Mark, Owen and Claire. You've really expertly taken us through what, as we've said, is a very complex and broad, wide-ranging subject matter. And can I especially thank Jarmo, who's masterfully led us and guided us through this morning, made sure that everyone's had the opportunity to contribute and that everyone's voice and questions have been addressed. Can I also thank the Chamber team for organising today, and can I also especially thank those guests that joined us. Hopefully that you found that session as absolutely fascinating as I did, and thank you so much for your contributions, your engagement and your questions today. We hope that we will see you all at an upcoming Chamber event, and thank you all once again. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.